Hello and welcome to yet another Pauper deck tech, or to be more precise, to quick deck techs, um, in which I want to talk about two different ways of building, let's say, mono blue ninja strategies now that Moon Circuit Hacker has been out and people are very high on that kind of deck, saying it's tier 0, tier S plus, whatever. And yes, it is a very strong deck, and I think people are still not sure what's the best configuration. And I think there are two very good ways of building the deck that um, at first glance look like the same deck, but they really play out a bit differently. And I quickly want to explore with you the two different ways of building the deck. One way is by still playing Delver, the other one is focusing very much on the Faerie strategies, cutting the Delver actually, and instead playing for a bit of a longer game with a couple of different cards. So yeah, let's get into the deck techs, and I will of course start with my favorite way of building the deck still, which is with the Delver. So as you can see, I'm still only running 15 lands. I think the very first deck tech on this channel has been about the Mono Blue Delver list that I had at that time, and of course I have updated it since Moon Circuit Hacker is just too strong not to play it, I'm pretty sure. And so the deck has undergone a few changes, yet not too many. So I don't want to address each and every card in too much of a detail because you can check out the older list, which I mean is not that old. So um, let's get into it. I'm, yeah, again still only running 15 islands because I think in a tempo strategy like this, it's enough. You are very likely to hit your land drops still, because even though I've cut out on a few ponders and a preordain, we are still having enough scry and draw effects, even in the early turns, to hit our land drops. And if we miss out on a land drop once, it's not that bad, and we don't actually want to flood in the later stages of the game. I mean, if we are going to draw cards, we can of course still use all of our mana, but if we are going to draw that many cards, we are likely to hit some lands anyway. And again, we want to make sure to always hit meaningful cards. And we want to make sure to have cards that can decide the game very early on and give us control over how the first few turns are going to go. And from there, the idea is to be in such a good state that you can just control out the game from there. And I mean, that's essentially the idea of a classical tempo deck, and that's why I like a Delver list like this so much. So as counter spells, I'm still keeping in, of course, counterspell and 3 force spikes. Again, just 1 blue mana, so very efficient early game counterspell. Throws the opponent off curve. Either they don't play around it and potentially like get caught, let's say. We get probably a good spell with this because the opponent is going to try, and he has or they have to try and play on curve with us, because otherwise we are probably too aggressive. And if they are aggressive deck of their own, then of course also they want to play on curve in order to be able to kill us. So Force Spike, a very, very good card for this strategy. Of course, Daze would be better, but it's still banned, so Force Spike is the way to go. I still kept in Mutagenic Growth, and maybe it has gotten even more significant now with some meta changes. We want to protect our cards, we want to have as cheap interaction as possible, and Mutagenic Growth is, for example, protecting the Ninja of the Deep Hours and the Flip Delver from stuff like Lightning Bolt. Of course, we are still dying to Galvanic Blast later on, or to stuff like Defile later on, but in the early stages we even get to protect our creatures against that by casting Mutagenic Growth, and of course, again, it's a good combat trick. Still, I've got the playset of Snap, classical tempo card, and then still some Ponder, some Preordains. I've done a couple of cuts to make room for Moon-Circuit Hacker, essentially. So yeah, there's that. And Off One Mind, still very, very good card in this deck, has gotten better, I would guess, after including yet another human in Moon-Circuit Hacker. So yeah, still running some Off One Minds. Not the full playset though, because I really don't want to get this card trapped into my hand when I actually at some point don't have a human and a non-human. So yeah, only 3 of these. And then we have quite a lot of creatures, and you see we have only 21 spells, which is at the lower end of where you want to be as a Delver list, but I'm a bit greedy, and so far it seems to work out for me, essentially because, also because we still have a lot of setup with Ponder, Preordain, and Faeries for the Delver. So still running the 4 Delvers, 4 Faerie Miscreants, 4 Faeries, like the Faerie Armada along with the Space Starter Sprite, and then the 8 ninjas who essentially um, get set up by either of these 1-drops or a Space Starter Sprite end of turn even. Probably if at one point we don't counter anything with it, we can still flash it in and then next turn get a ninja train going and return the Space Starter Sprite to hand. One thing that I have noticed is that some people are not actually reading Space Starter Sprite, they just assume that it is going to counter a spell when you play it in response, but it only counters a spell when, as this trigger resolves, you have enough Faeries to cover the mana value or converted mana cost of the spell you want to counter. So let's say you have a Faerie Seer out and you flash in a Spell Starter Sprite against an opponent's Ichor Wellspring, and in response to the ETB trigger of Spell Starter, they bolt the Spell Starter, then their Ichor Wellspring will resolve. So if you're playing against these kinds of Delver or Faerie lists, then keep in mind that you can still interact with Spell Starter Sprite. It's not always a safe counter spell. So vice versa, if you really want to counter any spell and the opponent still might have some interaction up, then it's probably safer to just actually counter spell. Okay, so going to the sideboard, running some Annul. Of course, there are also other cards like Steel Sabotage that are better against specifically Affinity. You might even want to run these, but Annul can also counter some enchantment spells, which you might have to counter, like for example, let's say Makeshift Munitions or Pestilence. There, of course, having Annul is better. And then some Curfews. Really good against stuff like Bogles, really good for also protecting our own ninjas or our own threats by bouncing them to hand and also bouncing something from them. So at that point, Curfew becomes a pretty good trading spell, let's say. Also some dispels, because yeah, instants are everywhere and essentially a lot of interaction opponents might have is going to be instants. Also gutshots, because, well, strategies like these are huge in the meta right now. Also, you are going to kill some, let's say, Disciple of the Void in Affinity and so on. So gutshot, I mean, I don't know if I would sideboard it in there, but just to show you that we have good targets, and also against stuff like elves, still gutshot very good, and of course in the mirror. Then here I didn't split on Hydroblast and Red Elemental Blast. You could do that, of course, again to hide information or to deceive the opponent potentially. But yeah, I have just put in 3 Hydroblast, and then I've got Spire Golems and Stormbound Geists. Maybe Stormbolt Geist isn't needed anymore in the sideboard. Maybe you can just stock up on, for example, one more Spire Golem or Gutshot and one Hydroblast instead. For now it is like this. And the Spire Golems are essentially they are also for the mirror, where they are at a really good spot, but I don't have them in the main board here because I want to be a tempo deck. I want to play Delver. I don't want to have too many creatures, and also playing Spire Golem or like lots of Spire Golem essentially also means you have to run more islands. So it's more likely that you can resolve the Spire Golem for 2 to 0 mana, which is not that likely, especially in the early phase with this deck. So that much to the Delver deck, and now I guess let's talk about the Faeries list, and then I want to talk about the different advantages both decks grant to you. So see you in a second. Here is the Faerie list, and right away you can see we are running a couple more islands, exactly a couple more to be to be honest, in 17 islands. And that's due to the fact that we have a couple more expensive creatures. We are not running Delvers, and in that spot essentially we are running Azure Fleet Admiral and Spire Golem, and then there's also some more tweaks to the deck list. So we are also running a Counterspell here. We are however not running Force Spike, because with this kind of list, I think, especially after including Spire Golem and as your Fleet Admiral, we are very content to play a bit of a longer game. So it's not as much about the early stages of the game. Of course, having disruption there is still important, but we even have one more bounce spell because we are running 3 snaps and 2 curfews. So it's more likely that we can reset an early aggression from the opponent. And yeah, curfew is in here because here we are going more for, let's say, a value strategy. We are able to play a bit more laid back. It's if you want to compare it, it's a bit more like playing blue-red Faeries, comparing it to the, let's say, classical Delver gameplay. So curfew here is a very good card. Then in with that game plan in mind, curfew is a good card in the main deck, because you can just bounce back a spell starter sprite, you can protect one of your ninjas, you can get an additional ninja hit in by getting it back to hand and then enabling it again with some flyers, which we still have lots of. We can draw possibly an additional card of Faerie Miscreant. We could reset Monarchy with Azure Fleet Admiral, and we can at worst scry 2 or bounce a Spire Golem to hand and replay it for free, more or less at a later stage of the game after we have attacked, and then we've got a blocker back. So curfew offers a lot of utility here, and you wouldn't probably want to run it in the main board in a Delver deck, because there you are more going for an aggressive tempo strategy. So you don't actually want to reset your attackers. You want to attack in very early on. So yeah, that's why curfew is in the main board in this kind of deck. Still running mutagenic growth. It's just too good, especially with the ninjas. We really want to make sure that we can connect. We really want to make sure to protect our ninjas. And we are fine waiting a turn more maybe before we connect with them. So we will have stuff like the counterspell as a backup, available to protect the ninjas. We have a logic knot, which, including one logic knot, I figured out is essentially no drawback since we are not using the graveyard in any way. There's probably not that much graveyard hate in the main deck randomly. So yeah, just having one logic knot is fine. And then one copy of Loose Focus, especially with some Storm decks running around, One approach could be to play a Delver deck and just beat them down very early, or the other approach could be to just have more counter spells in the main board. So, or like more meaningful counter spells even in a later stage of the game. So Lose Focus, pretty good addition too, I think, and also very good counter spell early on. Essentially a bit worse mana leak with some upside later on. I'm just having 2 of 1 mind here because I think since we don't have Delvas, it's not that likely, like it's a bit less likely to turn on off 1 mind early on, and later on we should have the better late game anyway between Spire Golem, some more counter spells as protection for the ninjas, and also 1 copy of Azure Fleet Admiral. I have seen lists include up to 3 in the main board, but I'm not a big fan of it, since even though we are a bit slower and have a different strategy in mind, 4 mana for this kind of deck is still a lot. I think 1 could be fine, but probably not more than that. You don't really want to have your hand stranded with big butts. And I mean, essentially, we already have 3 Spire Golems as cards that won't be turned on until turn 4 probably. I mean, at worst you can play a Spire Golem for 3 mana when you have 3 islands out, but spending your whole turn 3 for a 2/4 flyer, I mean, it's okayish, but it's probably not what you want to do, and that's why I have decided on that split to just have 1 Fleet Admiral. However, very good card later on, and also probably we have beaten the opponent down already, so they don't have that much life, which means it's actually not that likely that they swing out to gain Monarch, because if they are the Monarch, then the Fleet Admiral can't be blocked, and also they open themselves up for a counter swing anyway. So yeah, I figured we don't need that many off 1 minds probably, and I have decided to play Preordain over Ponder here. Maybe it's incorrect, maybe you still want to split here, but I thought that when I'm having 4 slots for cards like this, I might as well go all in on Preordain. But maybe a split is better, you will have to figure that out. Also, 1 word on the islands. Again, since we are having a few more bigger creatures, I'm running a couple more islands. I think 15 is a fine ratio for Delver. It essentially means that on average every 4th card is an island. Of course, the probabilities for drawing islands are stacking up, so if you like haven't drawn any islands for a while, then it gets more likely that you draw one, in a sense that you have more successes in a smaller pool of cards. So it's more likely to draw an island when you have like 15 islands in the deck out of 50 cards than it is with 15 islands in the deck out of 53 cards, obviously. So yeah, most decks are even running 18 islands, but again, I'm pretty greedy, and I feel like this deck doesn't punish you really for being a bit greedy, so 17 lands is probably not too greedy, and also I'm still having Preordain and Faeries in here to secure that we are hitting our land drops when we need to, and also hopefully scry a few islands to the bottom if we don't need them in time, so we don't flood out too badly. Also, sometimes maybe you just connect with Moon Circuit Hacker without being able to reset it again and again with another hacker or snap, and then freshly connecting with it with ninjutsu, and then we are going to loot anyway, and then we can, for example, loot away some excess islands. So yeah, that's the main deck here. Obviously we have Spire Golem in the main deck already, so we have a few spots in the sideboard open. We also already have some curfews in the main board, so just 1 more in the sideboard, and the spots of curfew and Spire Golems, compared to the other decks, are filled with Echoing Truth as a fine universal answer for a couple of things we might otherwise struggle to handle, and also an additional blast. In this case, now I decided to split it up between Blue Elemental Blast and Hydro Blast, which I already talked about why you want to do that. So that's the two different deck lists you can play, in my opinion. Um, of course, many of the cards are the same, and reasonably often it will look the same, like the gameplay will not be different all the time, but it will be some of the time due to some card choices. And yeah, I talked about it already. With the Delver deck, you want to be more of a classical tempo deck where you beat down the opponent early on. And I mean, resolving Delver on turn 1 and then flipping it means that maybe you don't even want to reset it. And of course, if you are just a Ninja Lover 9000, then you think, well, why would you want to play Delver if you like either you flip it and then you reset it and it's essentially a worse Faerie because it didn't have a ETB trigger, um, or it doesn't flip and then it's less likely to connect, which again makes the idea of connecting with a ninja turn 2 weaker. That's true, but I think it's wrong to think of Delva as a card that stands versus the Faeries, because it's not competing with Faeries over a spot in the deck, but it's competing instead with stuff like Azure Fleet Admiral and Spire Golem, which are 4 creatures that I have in here that in the other deck would be Delvers. So the choice is essentially if you want to beat down more early on and, for example, turn on off one mind earlier and make it meta, like make the game meta in the earlier stages, or if you feel like you are gonna play a bit of a longer game anyway, you have good enough early game aggression and still just want to outvalue and outcontrol your opponent, and at that point you can of course pick up the Faeries list. However, the ninja, the the Delver list has some advantages here. For example, against like in a matchup like Storm, I feel like. So either you can tackle it by saying, well, I have some spots available here that I spent on hard counter spells or more or less hard counter spells, or you could say, okay, um, I'm hopefully just gonna jam Delver turn 1 and turn 2 start connecting with a 3/2 flyer, and until let's say turn 5, that's already 12 damage from just one blue mana when the opponent doesn't really interact, at least not with the board. Um, and then it's pretty likely that you get some more hits in and maybe even a pump from mutagenic growth. So I feel like, and that's also my experience playing the deck, if the opponent doesn't interact, it's pretty likely that you kill them turn 5 or 6, probably, especially if you hit Delva turn 1 or turn 2 at the very latest and let it flip. So that's an advantage of a Delva strategy in that kind of meta. And also what it does, it gives you some more decisions, which of course if you make the wrong decision, that's a bad thing, but if you make good decisions, it's very rewarding, I feel like. And this deck is a bit less volatile, but that way also I feel like gives you a little bit less skill expression, probably because it has a bit more of a no-brainer late game between Spire Golem and Azure Fleet Admiral. So if you pick up on a deck like this, I would also probably recommend you to play Faeries if you want to, however, um, let's say kill the opponent a bit quicker, um, have more pressure on early in the early game, and you also feel like you are very good or very acquainted with some kind of these strategies, then I would still probably recommend you to play a Delver list. 3 or 4 Delvers. I have been playing 3 Delvers. I have stocked up to 4 again. I think it's fine. You could also cut a Delver for an additional spell. So it's 3 Delvers on 22 spells then. And yeah, I think that's most of the stuff I wanted to say. If you are looking for some more in-depth stuff, I can do that as well, or like discuss it in a longer video, or you can contact me to discuss it with you in private. Make up my mind potentially. Maybe not though, because I have played the Delver deck a lot and have seen the Faerie deck a lot, so I think I have a solid opinion here, but I try to keep my mind open for some feedback. So here you are with essentially 2 short deck techs. I hope this got you some insight. I am looking forward to you criticizing some of my choices or some of my opinions. And yeah, um, I will probably upload some less meta deck tech in the next week. For now, I wish you a good time. See you soon. Goodbye.